the countries and into the specific material and data. I was recently elected, as Emeka mentioned, as the president of the South African Chamber of Commerce in America. And I'm very proud and happy to be in that role because it is a fascinating position to be in, to hear this dialogue that's just increasing in tenor and velocity of decisions about trade and companies wanting to come. So first port of call, let's talk a little bit about South Africa, but not the South Africa we always talk about, the gold, the minerals, the first world infrastructure. A bit about the other side of it. For example, South Africa was recently voted as the top destination for the top 1,000 UK companies for offshore call centers. Same language, timeline, etc. Makes sense. Other headlines that recently reached South Africa was Bain Capital and KKR, the big boys of private equity. Headline in South Africa, they have landed. Quite ominous. But what were they there for? To acquire assets. Bain Capital's acquisition of Edcon, a large retailer, is testimony to the confidence they are starting to place in the economy, because it is actually a long-term play. Being a retailer, it is a play on the belief that this middle class that's growing will continue to grow, that the boom and the confidence in consumer spending will continue. But the story of Africa, and my focus, is beyond South Africa, because there's so much happening. Undoubtedly, Nigeria is clearly a hotspot. Challenges, and we will hear a lot about Nigeria in these 4 days. But looking at Goldman Sachs' work, we had the famous BRIC report. The new report, the Next 11, highlights that by 2020, Nigeria is going to be amongst the top 10 economies in the world. It's an investment opportunity. Think about that. Has anyone, our banks, our investors, seriously thinking about going to Nigeria? If you haven't, why not? What's going on in Nigeria? A couple of things. I want to talk about it from the perspective of capital markets. Bellwether signs again. Guaranteed Trust Bank recently issued the first Eurobond out of Africa, and let's exclude South Africa, but the first Eurobond, the raising of international capital offshore, off its own balance sheet, without any sovereign backing. That is an indication of the confidence that's taking place in that economy. Without any sovereign backing, Nigerian company raising capital offshore. It's just a sign of things to come. Looking at the oil industry, Africa provides 18% of the US's oil supply, with the Middle East just 16%. It's an important strategic partner. Let's put Nigeria in perspective. 2.2 to 2.4 million barrels of oil a day. The same league as Kuwait, same league as Venezuela. But with Africa, let's start being careful about this. And Emeka and I have had these discussions. We have to move away from what's called the curse of the commodities. Because it's not about oil, it's not about commodities. For Africa to truly be sustainable, we have to move beyond to other industries. So let's unpack those very quickly, and I'm going to move through these very, very, very fast, because I can see that clock counting down. What else is going on there? Egypt. Egypt is launching a first large industrial zone, 2.8 billion investment. Announcement just came out the next few weeks. Close to the Mediterranean, near Alexandria. Textiles, petrochemicals. It's being managed by a Singaporean-based management company. So they want to emerge as an industrial powerhouse across the industries, away from oil. Let's look at agriculture. Let's look at forestry. What's going on there? In Tanzania last week, we had the launch of the East African Organic Produce Standard. Again, gathering together farmers, gathering together stakeholders in East Africa to get standards for organic produce. Better prices. It ties in with small-scale farmers in terms of no pesticides, no fertilizers. Again, opportunity to tackle markets to get that higher price. Uganda, the new forest company, replanting and redeveloping their forests. Why is that important? As their energy needs are met and electricity is needed, poles for rolling out electricity. But here's the sweetener in the deal. They're going to be tapping into carbon credits. Let's go back to Nigeria. The banking sector has undergone tremendous transformation, from over 80 banks to 25 banks, strengthening of the system. But what's going on there? Only 10% of the country is banked. Largest population in Africa is in Nigeria, 135 million plus people. Think about that. There are only 700 ATMs in the country. Opportunity. The same for telecoms across the country. Now let's look at the continent as a whole. People look at the roads, for example, and they'd say, Angola, 90% of roads are untarred. Problem. It's more expensive to transport goods. Prices of goods go up. Inflation is affected. Nigeria, 70% of roads are untapped. Zambia, 80%. In general, more than 50% of roads are untarred. This is an opportunity. Energy needs, it's an opportunity. So what are the signs that things are fundamentally changing? Let's look at the stock markets in Africa. If I had to ask you in 2005, what was the best performing stock market or stock exchange in the world, would Egypt come to mind? In 2005, the Egyptian stock exchange returned over 145%. What's going on in some of the other countries? Let's look at some 2006 numbers. Kenya, over 60%. Nigeria, over 40%. South Africa, in the 20%, high ones. These are the trends that are taking place. But in any investment decision, a key question is, what is my alternative investment? Because in Africa today, we're competing globally for capital. And global capital is agnostic, has no loyalties. There's an overhang of capital in the US, and the key is yield pickup. And what Africa is providing is a diversification play and also opportunities for yield pickup for the investor that's aware of what he or she is doing. Now, when looking at Africa vis-a-vis other things and countries in Africa vis-a-vis other things, comparisons become important. 10 years ago, there were very few countries that received sovereign ratings from the Standard & Poor's, Moody's, and Fitch's. Today, 16 African countries and growing have sovereign country ratings. What does this mean? Take Nigeria again, double B minus. In the league of Ukraine and Turkey, immediately we have a comparison. The backbone of making investment decisions for global holders of capital. Some other figures. South Africa, triple B plus. Botswana, A plus. Burkina Faso, B minus, and so on. In fact, one of the big agencies is setting up an office in Africa. Why are they doing that? Because they expect investment to follow. So one of the big bellwethers, and one of my final points I want to mention is, the interesting thing I read is that CNBC has launched their first Africa channel. Why is CNBC doing this? It's the 24-hour rolling Africa news channel. They're doing it because they are expecting things to happen. Me and you, the investments we are going to be making, the investment the world is going to be making, that's the 24-hour news channel dedicated to Africa. So that's the change that's coming down the pipeline. So in conclusion, I want to turn back to that very slide that made such a deep impact on me all those years ago. And this time give you the entire picture that I saw in 2002. And ask you that when you think about what your role can be in Africa, think about your journey in terms of bringing light to this continent, because there are amazing opportunities available. And think about the concept of transformation in the back of your mind, because things can be turned around rather quickly. In 1899, Joseph Conrad released The Heart of Darkness, a tale of grim horror along the Congo River. If one looks carefully, on the Congo River is one of those bright lights. And that's the very Congo River generating light. The old Heart of Darkness now generating light with hydroelectric power. That is the transformation and power of ideas. So the next step over the next 4 days is us exploring more of these ideas. And perchance, if you can always keep this picture in your mind, and that when we convene, maybe in the distant future, in 2020, that picture will look very different. Thank you.